Welcome to Discover Indie Film. I'm Jeff Howard, and you're about to hear me just blather on about Ajax All Powerful by Ethan Shaftel. Hey, Ethan.
Hey.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming over.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
So yeah, I'm going to stumble over my words for a second because I just took off the Oculus. I always forget what to call them. I want to call them visors.
The Meta Quest 3 headset.
Oh, that's right, the Meta Quest 3 headset. And I just watched your film, which is technically an immersive 15-minute animated short.
Yeah.
And by immersive, we mean I had on the thing and I could turn my head and look around this animated world. I imagine you were probably watching me watch it, and like I loved how there was perspectives and I could lean and see edges around windows but amazing experience. A wonderful story, wonderfully written, wonderfully animated, voice acted. I'm just like, I have so sold on that. By the way, Sherman Oaks Film Festival last year, we was your film at Filmvasion LA also last year, or just at Sherman Oaks?
Just at Sherman Oaks. Ajax was there for people to see at the gala.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so last year I was approached. Actually, probably 2 years ago, I was approached by Andy Cochran, and he sent an email to Filmvasion Los Angeles and said, "Would you ever consider having immersive films?" And I wrote back and said, "You mean like the visor?"
Yeah.
And he wrote back, "Yes." And I wrote back, "Absolutely not. We've spent so much money on the movie theater. Why would we have people wearing visors?" And he said, "Why don't you come over to the studio and watch what we've got and get an idea?" And I watched it, and I was pretty amazed. And I was like, "Oh, is this something we could set up in the lobby of the theater?" So for Filmvasion LA in 2024, it was just in the lobby of the theater. But we noticed, it's just people coming and going from screenings, and it was a little harder to manage. So Andy suggested we just set up a VR pavilion at the gala, because we had a nice opening night gala with about 160 people there. Oh. And so people walked upstairs and watched your film, as well as I think there was 2 or 3 others.
Yeah, at least 3, I think, including Andy's.
Yeah, and everyone who went up there and discovered it reported back to festival staff or myself that it was fantastic. And now I see why. So I've finally gotten to see a third one. And I do feel like being that goof. I mean, obviously, film festival runners are goofballs in the first place because we want everyone to see wonderful independent work. But then seeing this, I'm like, wow, my brain is already upset that like some big corporation hasn't encouraged hundreds of people to do what you did, so that if I bought one of these, there'd be hours and hours and hours of just like every night, put it on for a little while and watch something really cool like that.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like
yeah. I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem. It is a chicken and egg problem,
but it's such cool storytelling.
Well, I'm really glad you liked it. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that really defines where like immersive storytelling, in fact, all VR, including immersive games, and other types of experiences it can do that aren't maybe story first, the way that this was, and the way that we might come at it from like a filmic perspective. But it's just the variety and the experimentation. There's not a lot of similarity between pieces because we're figuring things out as we go on a project by project, on a movie by movie basis. Techniques that work, things that don't work, and iterate over multiple pieces.
Yeah, it literally is a frontier. Yeah. And everyone's experimenting and everyone's trying different things. I've now seen a film where you're a baby in the backseat of a car during a zombie apocalypse. Mm-hmm. And so you're locked in, you're a baby, you can't, the perspectives are pretty locked. And then I saw a music video, which was like a night out on the town with cool people, and that was something else. And then I saw your film, which everyone's already heard me say what I thought of that. So it is such different experiences too. Yeah.
And the 2 other pieces you just mentioned, one of the things that is different from Ajax All Powerful is that those are live action. They were shot with stereoscopic cameras. And one of the, there's pros and cons to that, but one of the cons is you're locked in space. Your head is basically taking the exact position and size of the camera, as if your eyes were those two lenses. And one of the reasons I started working in animation in VR, which wasn't my background before starting immersive work, is the sort of different affordances you can do. And you probably saw in Ajax, like you were mentioning, you can look around corners. It's 6 degrees of freedom instead of 3 degrees of freedom is how we define the difference with stereoscopic video or immersive video. And then we, of course, push that even further. You are constantly shrinking and moving and changing in space. You get as small as a tiny genie standing on the contract of the wishes, at one point on the table. You're inside the lamp, very small. And then you're the size of a skyscraper when Ajax turns huge at the end and you're sort of over a whole city. So that scale is just one of the things that I think is special about immersive media. And so figuring out how to use that for storytelling and for, to more closely put you in the psychological POV of a character, even if you're not in the literal point of view, using scale is something that I really have worked on over multiple projects and what to do with that and how that can be a replacement or have a similar sort of analogous use for a director in a VR medium, in an immersive medium, as something like lens choice and composition in cinema can do to reveal psychology of a character and reveal things that are happening. Just another tool in your tool set. And many of those techniques don't transfer into VR, even if you're doing a live action shoot. It's very different than framed content. So you're thinking more about space and your relationship to the walls and the room and the people around you. You're thinking more about tableau and changes in space, moving from a small atrium into a small foyer into an atrium feels something in architecture that means something in architecture as you traverse space. That's very similar to your experience in VR. And that's just not something that happens in cinema. In cinema, you're thinking more about composition, and you're thinking about long lenses and short lenses and what that means and what it means to the image, and editorial, juxtaposition and images juxtaposing. So there's a whole different set of tools with some overlap, but not 100% overlap with VR storytelling.
Yeah, and you are clearly, by writing and directing, I'm going to assume that each time you go out, you're learning more about how, just like a filmmaker, each film hopefully gets better as that person masters, frame, composition, other things of general, of 2D filmmaking. Sure. I guess that's what I should call it. But there's a lot more information out there for them to glean and learn from. Yeah. Whereas you really are pioneering, right? Like each time you finish I forgot, but you told me you've made one every year, every few years.
This is the probably fourth in a series of 5 animated immersive comedies that I have done since 2016.
And each time you finish one, when you sit down to write the next one, all the lessons are there at the writing phase, I assume.
Yeah, what to discard and what to really lean into, what worked and what didn't. And I do other VR projects outside of this as well, work for clients, training VR, some games in VR that also inform my learning and experience and my sense of what will work and what will work next time. But if we look at this sort of master slice of my work, this kind of original animated comedies, and that they tell similar sets of stories, and I think about them and write them in a way that is maybe more how you might have written a movie in 1913, where you're like, okay, what can we do here? I saw this one thing called a cut, juxtaposing 2 different shots together. I'm going to use that in this way, but we don't want to do too many cuts. Let's just do a cut every minute, and then seeing some other piece and say, oh, well, look, they're editing more, and then editing turning into a real art form and a craft and what that means. Those are basically discoveries in cinema that took 100 years to get to the point where the language is both known to the audience and known to the creators and evolves in lockstep. You know, every year you look at movies even just 10 years ago, there's differences. And it's more than just style. It's differences in the language. It's like language evolves. And so that's been a wonderful and fruitful process for decades and, you know, in cinema. And we're at the very beginning of that when it comes to the immersive media in general. And so it's exciting, and there's a lot of opportunities. But frequently, you know, a whole project may rest upon something that just isn't working very well, and you might have to abandon it. So that's why writing ends up really being more prototyping. Writing does not take place on the page. For me, writing is a pre-visualization process where I might write a script to a certain extent, but when really the juices start flowing and things are working, I'm in a pre-viz VR environment. I'm using gray boxes and rough shapes. I'm putting in my own voice or my co-writer or collaborator's voice as placeholder, and we're writing the scenes in the same time as we're thinking about point of view, placement, scale, movement, and the experience of the visitor. And visitor is the term I use, you know, for the viewer. It's not a player, it's not a viewer, but it's a visitor. And I think there's a lot of reasons why, you know, visitor is a good way to capture the and to define your role in an immersive media, where, you know, one of the main reasons is visitors. There's a host-visitor relationship. You know, when I walked into your house today, I followed you into the room. You know, I could have immediately turned and gone down a different hallway, but a visitor isn't the owner of the space. A visitor is someone who is paying attention to cues, and I'm invited into certain areas. You know, if I ask, oh, where's the restroom? You're going to tell me where to go, and there's a relationship that's similar. When you put on the headset, you have to have trust that the experience itself, or the creators itself of that experience, whatever that might be, have both know your uncertainties and will have a series of invitations to go further or to do more or to do less, and that those boundaries may shift over the experience, but there will be a dialogue between you and the piece. And that's just different from a viewer. It's different from a player. You know, it is a sort of a unique relationship, and there's trust involved on both sides.
So first, slide your chair forward so
sorry.
Your voice gets louder. It's okay. I'll be able to. I can fix it.
Awesome.
But I figured I'd take care of that now. Visitor is totally how I felt. I really did feel like I was visiting that world. I think you nailed it and language is important when you're defining something new.
Yeah, and I think a thing that is missed, you know, if you come from a film background, I have a mix of game and film background.
Yeah, I'm going to ask for your whole background.
Sure.
Soon.
But people come into VR from very different places, and that's one of the exciting spaces, you know, things about this, the peer group and the colleagues that I've met at festivals and at different places is that some are from theater, some are from gallery art and installations, a lot are from film or cinema, a lot are from games. You know, they come at it from, they're already using Unity, and then they're like, oh, I can do this new thing in VR. So for me, primarily film. And so, you know, I think about things like, okay, a jump scare in a movie. You can do the most outrageous thing in a film, and people will gasp, they'll scream, they'll drop their popcorn, and then they'll laugh, and you'll have them back 5 seconds later for the next scene. In VR, it's a more intimate relationship. If you sat down here in your chair and I put a device right on your head, right up against your eyes, if the first thing that happened was, and the audio's right in your ears, was screeching and aggressive imagery and something horrifying, you would take off the headset and not want to put it back on. So that is something, you know, that just coming from film, especially if you're doing something scary or something shocking, there's more at stake when it comes to that relationship between host and visitor, where you can't recover with a laugh and then go back to the next scene. It's intimate, and the trust is lost much more quickly.
I mean, absolutely. In fact, you are sitting across a table from someone who, when there's a snake on the TV, looks at the floor or the walls.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whereas in this medium, you can look away, but but you really can't escape. You really are in a different world.
Yeah.
And if your host abuses that, like you said, you're going to turn off your visitor's going to because you can't take it off.
Say goodbye.
Yeah. So let me ask about your background. So, because it was so well written, what I just saw was
thank you.
Honestly, wonderful writing. I love. I don't think we have to worry about spoilers, so to speak. But Ajax is a genie. There's a young girl who is brilliant in it, which is always a smart storytelling technique, I think, to give us someone to identify with, and it's very funny. So,
yeah, the voice acting, I gotta praise. Henry Winkler plays the genie, and Chris Parnell from Saturday Night Live and Rick and Morty is the lawyer. So though the character of Izzy, the young girl, kind of is the central like power that's moving this around. The experience of the short is really these two guys, the lawyer and the genie, Chris Parnell and Henry Winkler, in a extended back and forth in a negotiation, and that and even Izzy's role emerges over the course of the experience, and how central she is. It takes on some new meaning, but yeah, I'm really happy to hear you like the writing. It's. I mentioned the process for me being like a previs, or I follow a process that's very animatic based. So from the animation world, animatics they could be rough thumbnail sketches, but the key to an animatic is you've taken an image and you've put it in time. You put it to a timeline. You start having pace, and you have dialogue, and you have movement. Even if it's the roughest, fewest frames, you get time as the ingredient. So when you add time, now you're making a movie. A storyboard is great, but turning that storyboard into an animatic, now it's a movie, even at its roughest form. And so my process in VR is all based around an animatic, having an animatic in the headset and iterating on animatics for dozens or hundreds of versions and getting people in the headset at that point in such a way. And my goal with an animatic, or from outside of animation, something like a prototype is what people might say, or a gray box prototype. But the goal with each iteration is that it's standalone. It might be super rough, whatever, but you've done enough of the visuals and enough storytelling in the audio and the voice, placeholder or not, that you don't have to talk about it a bunch to an audience. In this case, maybe a single visitor, sitting in my office to try out my new thing, but you can just put it on and let it stand alone. And if they're into it, if they're laughing, if like watching any rough cut in a theater with a real audience, you become immediately aware just by looking at them from the outside, where their head is moving, whether they're smiling, whatever. You know the energy in the room. Are they digging it? Are they not? That's the great thing about screening rough cuts. You don't want to get in a scenario where you're pretending that it's going to be better than that, where you're saying to the audience, oh, ignore this, this is rough, this is rough. Instead, just say, here it is, it's rough, fine, you know what it is, it's an animatic, but then witness to see if it was funny or enjoyable or not.
So with these animatics also, do you use that yourself? Do you create it, and then, because I imagine you have to throw on the visor to see if it's working, if you've accomplished what you want, because in a way it's almost like creating. There's a barrier between you and your work that you really don't get to see until you throw on the visor.
Yeah, absolutely. So my animatic process is I have a background also in editing. So I was an editor for a long time, and so when I make animatics, I do super rough 360 video renders from a 3D software package, and then edit them in Premiere, and you can edit 360 video. So 360 video is the format, like for instance, the other projects you were talking about. Ultimately, what you're watching is a video file, a stereoscopic video file that's playing in the headset through those two lenses, so you see it in 3D and you see it as immersive, which is different from what you just saw with Ajax, which is it's built on the same way as you would build a video game. It's a real-time game engine based. It's built in Unity, just like lots of games, lots of VR games especially. So even though it's a storytelling piece, it's built in the same fashion you would make a video game, and is subject to the same limitations of polygons and lighting, et cetera, et cetera. You're not spending hours rendering out a frame. You're real-time rendering, 60 frames every second, the same way you would in a VR game. So in order to iterate at the speed that you want to in kind of a writing process, like you don't want to be writing something and then not able to review it sort of instantly. So this animatic process is a good middle ground. I can write, I can record my voice, I can put it right into a Premiere timeline, I can edit and change timing, and I'll have already spent some time rendering out a bunch of different points of view or frames or positions of a body from the 3D software. And I just use Cinema 4D because my background included some of that when I was an editor working with some motion graphics. I'm not great in it, but it's enough to do what I need to do for an animatic. So then I'm basically writing in Premiere, recording voices. Of course, I might have some text reference, but even recording a joke, you suddenly write it to be better. You're like, oh, that's not as good, and you take 3 takes until you get it right. Then I go back after the animatic and conform the script to the animatic. The animatic, or that sequence in Premiere, is always the source of truth, and everything else is just representative of that. And then I can render that piece of video out. It's a 360 video file. I play it back in the headset and watch it myself, show people, and then continue to iterate.
And comedy, everybody with half a brain knows comedy is 90% timing. So I imagine, especially with voice acting, do you even have to adjust after you've gone from your temp voice track to your voice actors, and then you've got to correct the timing at that point to make sure the laughs are working? For sure. And that is another thing that I do personally in the project. So of course I work with small teams and it depends on the project. So I'm not an animator myself. Though sometimes I get in the software to do camera position or certain things, camera movement, but certainly not a character animator. I'm not a modeler. I didn't, design Ajax visually. I worked with an artist who did all the main characters. But one thing that I do really well, and I do at a professional level, is dialogue editing and voice editing. So I personally, on all my projects, including the recent one that won the Webby yesterday, which I can talk about more, I do all the voice editing myself. So we record in the booth, we get a bunch of takes, we get options. Of course, directing those sessions, I have a sense of what takes you want, just like shooting live action, and make sure we don't move on until we get something good. Frequently, we have limited time, but you're trying to get as many options as possible. Take all that audio back, and then, you'd be shocked to see how much editing is taking place even in individual words. Like, definitely every line is a blend of takes and changes and tightening and lengthening this pause, even in an individual sentence. But some sentences and some words are from 3 or 4 takes. I mean, it is insane. And that is a huge part of this process because, and that's just true of animation in general. Voice performance, it drives so much, and that's what you're really animating to. And really, in this case, I don't even know which term to use, whether it's animator or really the director is truly performing. Like, the performance really is everything together is the performance. Whereas, obviously, I've seen it a million times where something is funny on the page and funny on the set, and then an editor who isn't good with comedy puts out a rough cut that there's no laugh. Right. And people are like, oh, we must have blown it on the set. But no, it was that. But it does really seem like in this medium, it really is the director is the author. Yeah, and I would say that's true of animation in general. That's why animation is really, it's not a, it's not a genre. It is a medium. And what you're doing in animation is acting, as well writing, as directing and writing and editing. So that's not unique to immersive. But as I mentioned, maybe I didn't mention it while being recorded, but my background was not animation. Prior to getting into VR,
my background was in live action. I had done some work that included motion graphics and maybe some animated elements. It just wasn't my primary background. But since about 2016, working closely with an animation partner, I've had the same lead animator on all of my VR projects. I really that's when I got into the medium. So it was simultaneous to becoming a VR filmmaker. From just a regular filmmaker, I was becoming an animation director, an animation filmmaker at the same time. And so I've learned to love animation in a way that I never did previously in my filmmaking days, and really now understand what the art form is. What it means to write a line on the page and then be responsible for every element of that with the animators, and what that allows you to do, and how it blends production and post-production. Because to your point, something's not working. Well, it could be that the posture of their body, more than even just finding a new take of the voice performance, but the way their hand moves or the expression they're doing, or the position of the camera in space, all of those things might make it work. And if you are, as an editor of live action material, during that phase of my career, you don't have options. Of course, there's visual effects, there's various things you can do, there's different takes, there's clever ways in editing to hide how I've blended two takes as I cut away and cut back or whatever. But nothing like the affordances of saying, okay, we're going to move the camera, we're going to move the body, we're going to add another person in, we're going to change the clouds, we're going to do everything in this frame or from this point of view to make this moment work cinematically, from a single sort of point of view and a single mind, and that's really awesome. I mean, it's really, of course, that means you want to tweak forever, which can always be a problem, but you can come up with really interesting things. And in certain projects, I've made major sort of foundational changes to characters, plot, even without being able to re-record any voices, make very major changes late in the process after screening almost finished work, seeing that something needed to be different, and then you can do that if you have access to everything in the image instead of just editorial control.
All right, there were lots of times in there where I realized, okay, Ethan's setting me up for a segue to ask about you personally. So instead of asking all the other questions I want to ask about Ajax and this whole process, take me back. When did you first get interested in the creative arts? What got you into filmmaking in the first place?
10, 11 years old. We had an old junky home video camera at home, and I just started making movies on it. That was the beginning of just me wanting to be a storyteller, me wanting to be a filmmaker for sure. So I've made short films, since I was 11. And during that same period, when I was in middle school and high school, we had a Apple computer. I guess it was a Mac computer then. When I was younger, it was an Apple IIe or something like that. But there were some authoring programs that were available. Something called HyperCard on a Mac that was just kind of free. It was precursor or simultaneous to the beginnings of World Wide Web, and had a very similar structure. It's almost like having an HTML kind of authoring system available on your computer. So I started building like games and interactive experiences pretty simultaneous to me really getting into making film. And I was making like radio plays. I was just doing anything to do with storytelling and performance, but frequently using technology. And so I, always went to film school. I went to film school here at USC. It was always my dream school. And when I was there, I, of course, was doing traditional film, but also some interactive media. And one of my big sort of final projects from my experience as an undergraduate was an interactive film that you played on a computer screen. It was live action. It was built out of loops and layers and points of view, and you played in a way very similar to Myst, which was a computer game that I loved also. So I was always into storytelling that included interactivity, even while my maybe primary interest was still linear film, and did that from an early age. And and through things like film school, it's just at that point there wasn't a place for something like that. The questions I would get, I made sort of a senior project called You Die at the End, which was this live action interactive short film. And people would ask, is this a game or a movie? And it was like, well, it's really more of a cinema experience. I call it You Die at the End because it's not a game. This is going to happen. That is the end. And the way that it unfolds is like it's a very, short film structured piece. It's all live action footage. There's actors and lines, but yet you were fundamentally part of it. You're a character. You're moving around, and people are saying things to you, and you have sort of agency in this piece. And very quickly, there was nothing I could do. That was before Sundance even started New Frontiers. I couldn't enter it anywhere. It just wasn't. It didn't do anything for me professionally. But years later, that was the first piece I prototyped in VR. Like, I got it out of the desk drawer from my undergraduate college days in 2015 to be like, well, now I'm hearing about, Facebook bought Oculus for $2 billion, and I've tried the Google Cardboard, and I'm really intrigued by VR. And now I see that this medium is wide open. If I make You Die at the End in VR, no one will ask, is it a game or movie? It'll be like, oh, it's a VR piece. It's a VR experience. And that's where, and they're open to whatever that might mean. There's no baggage at that point, and maybe even still now. So that's really why I got into VR, was touching on those much earlier storytelling, interactive storytelling experiences that didn't have a place in the world and always just ended up in the desk drawer as an experiment, as like, now I can do some pieces that I've had in my head for a long time.
Was You Die at the End? Was it a similar process, like using a computer? I was actually a very big fan of that Black Mirror Bandersnatch thing they did, where it was sort of like a choose your own ending novel. Was it sort of like there were choices along the way and people would choose the path?
It's a good question. The answer is no. When people think about storytelling, interactive storytelling, their first thought is a choose your own adventure, because that's something we have some experience with. And that's, another way of saying that it's a branching narrative. You could go left, you could go right, you could follow the ninja, or you could, get into the sedan, like whatever that is. We're aware of what that means, and you could represent that in a piece of paper like a flowchart that starts from one place and it has all these, there's 100 endings. That is one way of thinking about interactivity, and there's some pros and cons to that. But another way is thinking about your experience even in this house. You walk through the door, you may have left the door open or closed, right? That object has a state. It's either open or it's closed. You walked into the kitchen. If you think to yourself, oh, did I remember to close the door? So you walk back and it's open. Oh, you close it. Now you've changed that state to closed. Then you go back to the kitchen where, the state of the phone now is ringing. That's tracking the states in a world that you can move through is a more nuanced way. And of course, there's a lot of ways to think about, depending on how your project you want to make something. But think about how, even what I've described as a choose your own adventure would go. Do you leave the door open or do you leave the door closed? Okay, I'm going down the branch of door open. Okay, so now I go into the kitchen. Do you go back to the door to close it? Do you not? Okay, I'll go back to the door. Do you close it or do you not? Well, I closed it. Now, so imagine that branching structure. If that's the only way we're thinking about interactivity, we're limited to huge amounts of media, huge amounts of branches, and basically an unrealistic way of negotiating the world. If we can think about space with objects and states, including characters and people's emotions that change depending on what you choose to do with them, then we're already well past anything like choose your own adventure, which is really something that's limited to what you might do in a book, So in You Die at the End, you're able to navigate a map by clicking forward, left, and right. You're walking around, and your point of view is on screen, and interacting with people, and whether you've talked to them or not, whether you've, changes their state. And when certain things are done and achieved, I've talked to this person, and then you go in this room, well, now the state of that room and what's going on is different than if you had gone in before to interacting. So it was more like a world full of characters that had states, and the story emerges based on what you're told to do and what instructions you follow. And it all centers on you being a surveillance fan, going into kind of a deal that goes wrong. You're an undercover cop, and all this emerges. You don't actually know who you are or what you're doing until people's reactions to you makes it clear. Things go wrong, you come back out, and the manner in which you die and why and what happened, which is actually something you saw in a flash forward in the opening credits, now makes sense. And it has a very cinematic feel. You feel like it's a short film experience. It just happens to be one that you're playing a part, a first-person role.
And quite interactive. So when you first learned about immersive, were you like, oh, finally? Was you're like, finally,
this is what I've been waiting
searching for forever?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've confessed to Andy, actually, Cochran, that I wasted a lot of hours of my life on Second Life when it came out.
Yeah.
And it was similar to what you're describing. Of course, it was interactive with other humans in it, but it was a 3D environment on your screen, on a computer screen.
Yeah.
And you just moved around, and, it wasn't super operable, but it was really fascinating. And I always felt like, wow, why isn't this more popular?
Yeah.
But now, so when immersive came along, yeah, it was just like finally, not just the paintbrushes, but the gallery is here, I guess, or the theater. I mean, it's completely different.
There's so much that works out of the box when you put a VR headset on, and what hits people right away is like, wow, I've been transported somewhere else. Like I know I'm in my living room, but what I see and what I hear is this new location. And that's, people call it immersion, they call it presence. It's not similar to something you get from other media. Like it is unique to that. Of course, there's similarities to how you can become absorbed in a great novel or how movies work with the visual element or putting yourself in the head of another character. But that really concrete transportation to another place is the special sauce. And everything else is built upon that. So a lot of types of work make sense immediately in a VR or an AR world, whether that's games. I used to be seeing my hand and shooting zombies on the screen, but now I'm holding a gun and I'm shooting zombies here in my room. Could be games. It could be communication. I want to see my cousin who lives around the world, but I put on the headset and we're in the same room. So there's tons of things that work immediately, and they don't take a lot of imagination to say, wow, that's a perfect fit. The one thing that doesn't just come for free, with VR is storytelling. And that's because, cinema storytelling, character-based, protagonist-based storytelling. In cinema, a lot of what that technology is these series of discoveries about how to onboard and funnel all of our points of view and our emotional points of view into that of the protagonist so that then they face hardship and then they have highs and lows and then they have a moment of emotional catharsis and we're all in tears in the audience because we're so fully seeing the world from that person's point of view. But it's an emotional point of view. We're not seeing them through their eyes. In movies, of course, sometimes there's a point of view shot that's very literal. Oh, there's the Tarantino has the trunk shot where it's like you're looking out of the trunk at the people who have captured you. So there's plenty of those individual moments, but those are the rarity. That's kind of like the little gag shot. The real shot is what happens next. It's the shot reverse shot editing where we see, who's bound up and our hero is in the trunk. That's what cinema does well, is showing what the protagonist's face looks like when they're emoting. It's they're crying, they're laughing. That's what makes us, or one of the main ingredients for making us see the world from their point of view. So that protagonist relationship depends on many technologies and discoveries. 3-act structure in film is all about that. Okay, let's take 10 minutes or 15 minutes to onboard you into this character through a couple triumphs and maybe an embarrassing moment or something. Now you're in the character. Now let's set up the inciting incident. Now let's have them go through, obstacles, and then we'll have this payoff that mirrors the beginning. That structure wasn't instantaneous with just motion picture technology. That was the result of decades of development in storytelling and what really worked for cinema. Editing is another example. Reverse shot editing. Turns out that's a really good way for us to parse information. First seeing the character, the protagonist looking at something and what they feel about it, and then seeing what they're looking at. Eisenstein, I mean, it was academic and practitioner work for years and decades before that became a really well understood and often utilized thing. Now we know it's our mirror neurons. When I look at you crying, I have a part of my brain that feels like I'm crying. That we didn't know mirror neurons existed until like the late 90s or whenever it was. But we were using that in cinema. We were depending on mirror neurons for decades. So all these things adds up to you watch a movie and I feel like I'm the protagonist. And we forget that that's a delicate house of cards with a lot of different techniques. So now you pop the headset on, and coming from film, you're like, oh, I see. I'll just put, the character will be seeing through the eyes of the protagonist, and everyone will be looking at them, and they'll feel exactly what they would feel if they were watching a movie. And then it doesn't work. And we're like, well, why doesn't it work? Well, because none of the things, that whole house of cards, all of those technologies and brain hacks that make cinema a perfect delivery device for emotional catharsis and protagonist point of view, suddenly we're back to square one, or only a couple of those things overlap with what VR can do well. And so that's the challenge. And then you're like, well, why wasn't it moving? It would have been moving if it was a movie. And that's where we are with immersive storytelling. Storytelling, and especially focusing on the protagonist's opinions, their actions, their choices, more than my choices and my opinions and my gut reactions. In cinema, you leave yourself behind. In VR, you bring yourself into the movie too. So instead of a protagonist, it's more like in a movie about a little girl being bullied, I'd be in tears, like, I'd be that girl. But if I'm walking down the street and I see a girl being bullied, my reaction's different. I might be outraged. I might try to stop them. I might go to the police. Someone's bullying that little girl. But I'm not just for free because I'm nearby inside the head of the little girl. I haven't had the first act to get me in their head. I haven't had the reverse shot editing. I haven't spent time with her. I haven't had her whole journey so that now that's an impactful moment. So I guess that's the best analogy, is that VR in some ways, your intuition might be, we'll put the VR camera, we'll put the visitor near this protagonist, and then we'll just get everything we expect from a cinema relationship for free. But it's not true. You have to figure out ways to do it that can make that happen.
And is this your technique? Because you just made me aware that in the other examples of immersive that I've seen, you are actually a character in the story, whereas in yours, we are just a visitor. We're an observer. Right. There is not a person sitting in that room who we know that's who we are. We are really just we are just visiting this scene. We're visiting this world. It is actually a very different perspective, I think, that you give.
Yeah, and there's a cluster of decisions and techniques that I think makes that work in my work that aren't necessarily universal to every different piece and project. For instance, I've been in VR projects where you're not. The term we tend to use is embodied. Are you embodied or are you not? So in Ajax All Powerful, you're not embodied. You can't look down and see anything. You're a floating whatever. Now, whether that becomes disturbing to you or whether that even rises to consciousness is dependent on other factors. How the project begins, things that happen very early on, your expectations matter. I've been in VR projects where I've been like, where am I? Why is no one looking at me? And in that case, there hasn't been a cluster of techniques that have made me comfortable being what I am. This, going back to that term visitor, you aren't invited in just the right way. Now, it seems like that you're only now, noticing, I wasn't really anything in that movie. That's normal for Ajax All Powerful. This piece, people put on the headset, they don't think about it. There's a reason for that. How it gets on board, you start by seeing this kind of like introduction thing, if you recall. Now you're in the lamp. You become aware of Ajax very quickly. There's certain steps that help to dissolve your own identity to put you focused on Ajax. And that is, and some of those I'm sort of intuitively working out. Some of those are getting worked out in the process of iteration in the animatic. And sometimes I'm looking back and trying to define why something worked or didn't, only in retrospect. Ajax is, the fourth of these projects where I've been trying to do something very specific with those techniques and tell protagonist-based stories. And each time they get a little better, and I'm eliminating some things that didn't work. And so what you're seeing is pretty polished from that standpoint. The intent and the objective of the visitor point of view works really well. And I don't know all the reasons why, but I am reacting to what I can. I'm defining what I can, and then I move it, forward into future projects.
In fact, I'm now, like you said, it's all at an unconscious level as the visitor, because now I realize how smart it was that you started with us just watching TV, and we don't know where we are, and then we actually see the person next to us or the being next to us, and then you entered when the lamp gets open, we emerge with Ajax. But it's such a good. It's such a, was that not, that was obvious. Everything is intentional. Like you started off, okay, I'm not going to overwhelm you at first. You're just watching TV. This is a familiar experience. And then you sort of introduce us into this world when we enter the attorney's office.
Yeah, and the main techniques that also help to leave yourself behind, abandoning your own sense of where you are and what you ought to be doing, that I've been using and experimenting with over time. Two are these small movements and repositioning of the visitor's perspective, the camera, in other words, which I call zips. They follow certain rules, and I really think of them as VR editorial techniques, because like good editing, they really happen below the conscious level. You might be aware of them sort of in aggregate, but the way that opening moment really works, and that's why I mentioned to you before that Ajax is actually interactive behind the scenes. I'm waiting for you to look at certain places, and things are built in loops and layers of animation so that and so nothing stops, nothing pauses, to make sure that you follow the visual cues, and then when you do, movements and change happens. So these zips that I do are always movements that are directly towards or away, whatever you're already looking at. And that's important. I don't want to change the object of your attention. I want the way that the story unfolds to be a choreography between what you're looking at organically and what I lead you to visually or with audio cues, and then movements that I impose on you. So you started Ajax watching a news program, giving this background on what's going on in the world. At some point, the rest of the world fades up around you, and you realize there's a physical TV, and you're in a little room. Turns out to be this genie's lamp. And you'll hear grumbling to your right, which is Ajax, reacting to the news. You might look right then and see him, or you might not. Lots of people just keep watching the news. At some point, he gets mad and throws his beer can, and it breaks the screen. So now we have a real strong visual cue. You've just seen a beer can fly from your right-hand side. So then you look. The second you do, he throws the remote because he's still holding the beer can. He drinks from the beer can. As soon as you look, he drinks and he burps. And on that burp, I move you, the visitor, back into the upper corner. Actually, at the same time, shrinking you. You're not aware of it, but you're sort of Ajax size at the moment where you notice Ajax. You shrink to be to be smaller as you fly across the room, and now we've widened into a wide shot that shows Ajax in his little shabby lamp, the pizza, the boxes, the beer bottles. It's a very classic kind of camera move, but it only works in this one way. If I didn't wait for you to look at Ajax and move, if this was a 360 rendered video and I couldn't tell when you actually did, then what if you're still looking at the TV when I move you up into that corner? Well, now you'd be staring at the corner of a wall, and you'd look around, why am I looking at this? And then you'd look down to your right, and there's a little Ajax in the corner. Doesn't make any sense. So I need it to be interactive. I need it to be a choreography. Wait till you look. As soon as you do, pay off that shot. And then the reason it's moving towards or away, and that's very purposeful, towards or away is always adding something to your experience. If you're moving closer to something, that if you look at something because you want to, and then I move you closer, I'm adding detail. You see more than you did before. If I wait till you look at something that you already wanted to, who threw the beer or who threw the remote? That guy. And then I move you back, I'm adding context. But it's critical that in each step, I'm adding. So just like good editing in a sequence, good cinema editing, I'm trying to give you information at the speed of consciousness for you. Who's that guy? He's a genie. Oh, this is his lamp. And, sometimes it's a joke. Sometimes it's just information. But I'm the choreography between visitor and host is super tightly connected here and intermeshed. And the result is that you don't feel like, oh, why did I fly up into a corner? I haven't given you agency where you feel like you can, move around this space and then taken something away. I've just given you things that are interesting to look at and then added context or added detail, and the whole movie is a continual string of you look, more detail, more context. You look, more detail, more context, and everything fits together.
And that's because this medium, the visor, allows you to track my eyes?
Yeah.
And so you were able to use that feature of this technology to create interactivity that I believe the other stuff I've seen just doesn't even try that feature yet.
And people certainly do interactivity. And I mean, there's limits in the live action video stuff. So the stuff you happen to have seen fits in a different category.
Yeah.
But there's tons of story-based pieces out there that are built in game engines like Ajax. But I tend to do something pretty novel here. Those types of movements and the non-embodied but very carefully interactive flow of a linear story. I'm not telling a story that you can affect. It's like you die at the end. You're not, that even you were embodied or, not in VR, but you played a character. In these, you just don't, but you have a relationship to the story itself where I think of it more as a story world kind of melding and conforming to you. And in a very simple way, just melding to your pace, the pace of your movement, and when your head lands on something, and then reacting to that, always giving and never taking away, that creates this tight visitor relationship where you're not even wondering whether you ought to be doing something different. It just doesn't come up. And in many VR pieces, I'm constantly thinking about whether I ought to be doing something different. Did I do the right thing? Am I looking in the right direction? And so whether or not my techniques are universal, because I think there's a lot you can do in VR that isn't what I do, but I do think that at least the rationale behind my techniques, that part, this shifting, invitation-based visitor engagement, that ought to be a universal in the writing and creating of storytelling-based, immersive work.
For sure. And you're pointing out that just like, it really just is a more expansive medium because, a baby carrier-based film is just as valid as this, but what am I trying to say?
It's a big, big tent.
It is a huge tent, and there'll be genres or categories that are hopefully in the future there will be like an understanding with audiences of like which kind of immersive thing are you watching?
Totally. And that, you think, how crazy would it have been to imagine from seeing early motion picture, like what a rom-com is, that.
Walking into the cinema in the mid to late 60s and being like, well, if I turn my head this way, it'll be color. If I turn my head that way, it'll be black and white. Like when they were thinking about color, right? Like, it's so interesting.
It's sort of beyond conception what the ways in which we'll distinguish immersive experiences from each other, the genres, the categories, the precedences. We're not at that point where there is enough to even see some of these things emerge. I will say something about Andy's piece because he certainly was very aware of the limitations of not seeing your own face. So his entire project and his piece is written thoughtfully with that in mind. We actually don't care so much about the baby in that story. We care more about the baby's parents, and it's an interesting point of view. So he's made the choice to use the affordances of VR to transport you into some place and to some size, this sort of baby seat that we don't normally have access to, and then has crafted a story and a world in layers, because there's inside the car and outside, that develops and widens over time before you're aware of the full scope of what's going on and what world we're in. And he, is cleverly designed to put human faces and emotion within our field of view. It's actually a great way to see two people talk is you're a baby in a car seat looking at your parents in the front seat. So the limitations and or affordances are well known, and in that piece, it's just explored a little differently. And also even just the limitation of being in a baby seat, that helps to explain and own the lack of movement that you have that you're able to do. So there's a lot of interesting ways into both the pros and the cons, or the promises and the limitations, and just being thoughtful about it, and especially making your intent clear throughout your own process, and being willing to change intent and throw something out in favor of something that's working, and then try to build everything else around to maximize it, I think is the way to go. For
sure. In fact, I always give him credit for it's almost Hitchcockian in that you have more information than the people you're watching. Like you are aware what might happen to mom if she gets out of the car. Mm-hmm. And so you're actually shouting at the screen going, "Don't get out of the car, Mom." But, it's that thing, like there's a bomb under the table and you're shouting. Hitchcock wants you to your brain is screaming inside your head, "Get out of that room. There's a bomb under the table." And the characters don't know. Yeah, he uses that technique. But it's definitely much more traditional cinema in a way.
Yeah.
Whereas yours has an interactivity. So actually what you've explained to me is based upon the way I'm looking, like Ajax could be slightly different each time. Just in
certainly in timing,
the timing at which things are revealed. I probably don't have a good enough memory to catch the differences because the story will play out the same way. But I can make something happen faster based on, I could be stubborn and always look away from the TV as long as I could possibly because I know which side of me Ajax will appear. And I could experiment with it, I suppose.
For sure. And then I really take as my, guiding principle, since I am trying to make a piece of cinema. I'm trying to make, I call these movies, this is a motion picture. Of course it's immersive, but, and that means something different. But I think of this as, a movie, a protagonist-based cinema experience. So my guiding principles really should be what cinema is doing. And I pointed out how, cinema technology hacks all of our individuality in favor of the protagonist's point of view. So you could say it's very unifying, right? Well, think about what a game does. A game tends to want to differentiate. In fact, we have a concept called a score. And if I have a high score, it means something very different than if you have a low score. And I don't just mean video games. I mean all games. I go into a world, I go out onto the tennis court, or I sit down at the chessboard, or I put on, Call of Duty, and I'm going to be differentiated from my peer group that would be playing at the same time based on my own choices. It's all about me. That's not what cinema does. That's one of the problems I have with the choose your own adventure. And when people in a conversation say something like, "Oh, but there's so many endings, the replay value is great." I question, the replay value? I don't know. That's not why you go to a movie. That might be why you play Tetris. Let's see if we can get a better score. So when I think about interactivity, the way that I've used interactivity in these projects is to unify. I used to work at a haunted house when I was in high school for a couple of Halloween seasons out in a barn. I lived in Kansas. And my role was the Wolfman around the corner. And lots of people would come to this haunted house. It was family friendly, it wasn't super gory. So maybe a little girl and her mom would walk around the corner. I could see them coming. And my job, in the story world, my character beat was I had to scare them as a Wolfman. So I would growl. I had a little noisemaker that clacked, and I would scare the people. They'd move on. So if that was my character's goal, was to deliver this story beat, and a little girl is terrified, she's clutching onto her mom, I might let her see me, right, and put a finger to my mouth, and then go boo, and it'd be quiet. She screams, and mom laughs, and they move on. So, okay, I've delivered my story beat. Next people around the corner, couple drunk frat guys, right? Well, I'm not going to do the same thing. I'm going to back up, I'm going to wait till they're almost past, and then make the loudest noise possible at their backs. They scream, and they run on. So the goal there, outside the haunted house, there's the frat guy and there's the little girl. And the girl, says, "Did you see the Wolfman? He was really scary." And the frat guy's like, "Yes, he was really scary." So I've unified their experience despite them having different, when I scream at the little, when I, growl at the little girl, I'm looking down. When I growl at the tall frat guy, I'm looking up. I've made very small changes, ultimately, pacing, volume, direction, in order to give two very different people a more similar experience. So that is just the best way I can explain interactivity for unification instead of differentiating purposes.
Yeah, it's almost customization in a way, understanding your audience.
Customization that unifies, both get the definitive Wolfman story beat. Yeah. So your experience of Ajax...
And you're giving them the best story for that person.
Yeah, to the extent that I can read them, because I'm a human being and not a machine, I can look at them and say, okay, I'm going to do this. They're moving slow. I'll do this. They're moving fast. They're tall. It doesn't mean I know everything about their psychology. And in Ajax, doesn't know anything about you except where you're looking. It's just, just ray tracing your gaze. It's just gaze triggers. But with that alone, I've made it so that when you talk to someone else who's seen it, you've had the most similar experience possible. Despite any other thing, where you wanted to look, how long you wanted to spend, you guys have had the most definitive, unified experience.
In fact, we would be, myself and, if I manage to get my wife to watch this when we're done,
yeah,
we would be unable to distinguish any differences we saw.
Right.
Because we saw the same story, just revealed, like you said, timing-wise, little subtleties. But those subtleties actually do make it more engaging and immersive.
Yeah.
This is amazing stuff. I normally curse more. I really want to say it's amazing shit because, my goodness, this is just a wonderful frontier.
I think so.
It really is.
I believe in it.
It really is. So you discovered it in 2016, you said?
Yeah.
Or
and then
did you have hints of it coming? Like
2015, 2016 was really when I got into it. And then I made a small piece called Extravaganza, and there's a bunch of big differences. It was a 360, even it was animated, but it was a 360 video, so it was rendered. I started to use movements that were similar to zips, but they weren't true zips yet. And I got that into Tribeca, and I met. It was just a huge deal to go to that festival, and I met a lot of people I started working with professionally immediately, and I pretty much went all in on VR. I stopped doing really any kind of client work except VR at that standpoint while trying to do my original projects as well. And I did a couple of VR animation pieces that were funded by Google that had funded an animation studio called Shadow Machine here in LA that does a lot of TV, and they did the Guillermo del Toro Pinocchio movie and BoJack Horseman, and so they had done a lot of great stuff, just no VR. And they saw Extravaganza, and they hired me to direct a couple of VR projects for them that were super short. But I started to experiment more with those, and really now we're seeing zips and movement that are much more similar to Ajax, but still not every part. They weren't interactive either, so I couldn't wait for you to look, but I could make some guesses about when you would. And then Ajax was really when that whole system came together. I convinced the financiers of that. It was a Chinese VR arcade company that approached me based on seeing those Google shorts. That wanted something similar, and I said, well, let's not do a pre-rendered 360 video, let's do a real-time thing. And they were very suspicious of that, but over the course of developing the project, the headset's technology changed, and new technology was announced, and we came out on the first version of Quest, the Quest headset, and then it made sense, my sort of bet on why to do it this way made sense. And then most recently, a piece called Gargoyle Doyle, which is a big international co-production. I mean, it's not a big production. It's very indie, but it's bigger in scope than Ajax. It's a 40-minute experience. It was made by 9 partner companies around the world. We took a long time to prototype and write and raise funds and find partners, and we premiered at the Venice Film Festival, and we won the Best VR award at the Annecy Animation Festival in France, which is it's called the Crystal Award. It's been an animation festival since the 60s. So that's a big, that's a big place for animation in cinema. And they've been a big supporter of immersive animation for a long time as well. So that was just a lifetime dream come true to win that award last year. But the thing about Doyle is that what you saw with Ajax is a very robust system of movement and sort of rationale, the grammar of how that works. So Gargoyle Doyle is a 40-minute experience, and of that, 30 minutes are full VR, seated, just like Ajax. And the system of zips and the style of the storytelling is very similar. But the 10 minutes, which is sort of this outer framing device, the first couple minutes, which is almost introductory, but then the whole final sequence and the last character resolutions and emotional beats, they take place in augmented reality. You're not in VR. The headset is on your head, but you are in your own living room. You can see your own space. It's been transformed and augmented into a museum. So there's now exhibits on the walls and things that aren't normally there that you can interact with. But it's a very different set of agency and visitor perspective. And so that was a big creative leap to say, okay, I know this works, but let's build out from that. So now there's two modalities. You start this experience in your own home. You can see your own body. You're standing instead of seated if you're following the instructions in the setup, or if you're doing an installation like a location where you've bought a ticket, you'll be standing for this beginning and end, and then move and transform into another mode where you're not embodied, where you're seated, where you can't see a room, where you've shrunk and you're in VR, and then what that does, and there's the same characters in both layers of the story, but that kind of nested or layered agency where your own visitor, that's get back to what I was saying about invitation, where you're invited to different levels of, self-regard, self-interest, and thinking about your own choices, your own movement versus the protagonist. It shifts several times in this 40-minute piece, and the tone shifts. It's a lot of it is comedic, and it feels a lot like Ajax in the storytelling. And I wrote it, and so it feels like the same writer wrote it, but it is longer. It goes deeper. It tries to hit at something. I was trying to squeeze out some tears for some people at the end, and I think we were effective and successful some of the time with that. But it definitely tries to be broader in tone and storytelling throughout, and especially the key relationship is much more meaningful and authentic. So it just pushes it farther. It was just trying to do something more ambitious and something bigger.
I mean, ambition is the word here, because each time you're going out, you're not settling for like, okay, Ajax worked, I'm going to do another one just like that. I mean, first of all, jumping to 40 minutes must be that must have been a bit of a gutsy move. And then what you described of actually when it switches from VR to AR. Yeah. I can't even imagine that transition, but that must have, that just sounds so courageous to me to even try.
It took several years to put this project together, and projects evolve. Like, the length wasn't the goal. I thought it was way too long throughout, and then there were some versions that were a little longer when we were doing animatics in different stages and prototype versions, and then it got tightened up again. But it landed at kind of the right length for it. People don't say it's too long. It's long to show at something like the gala. 40 minutes. It's
also, you have 150 people around. Yeah. So if one person has it for 40 minutes,
two people watch it. Yeah, throughput's an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But now it's available. Ajax and Gargoyle are both available on the Meta store. So if you have a Quest 2, you have a Quest 3. Doyle especially is much better in the Quest 3. The headset that I have on the table here in front of us allows for augmented reality, where pass-through video where you can see your own space. So the version that you get if you have a Quest 2 and you buy it, it doesn't include that. It's only a VR version. But both Ajax and Doyle are available, publicly, and you can the tools to set up the room scale version are provided in the app. But we also have a seated-only, VR-only version that is, for most people, going to be the right way to watch it if you're at home, on your couch. You don't need to worry about space. You don't need to worry about setup. You don't need to follow any instructions. It's all there if you want to, but it's, because of that, even just conceptual complexity of like, wait, I need to put a chair in the middle of the room and I need to clear this many feet. It's an obstacle to the storytelling, I think, to enjoying it. So when we came to the commercial launch instead of at a festival or an installation where you would buy a ticket, we really leaned into how do we create a version of this that works easily, just as easily as Ajax does.
In other words, hardware determines what story you get to tell, or the way you get to tell the story.
It determines a lot, yeah.
Yeah, each time. So whether it's Oculus 2 or 3 is a huge leap.
Yeah.
And then Apple has their Vision Pro thing. Is that just a completely... have they created a situation where there can't be compatibility?
No, there's a lot of compatibility, actually. We're an indie project and an indie funded project, so we couldn't do a port to Apple without some funding, or to like Pico headsets, which is a popular Chinese headset in plenty of the world, but not the US. The Quest 3, the Apple Vision Pro have differences, of course, in hardware, but are very functionally equivalent when it comes to the ability to have VR, AR, to move seamlessly between the two. And our project was built in Unity. Unity was like a launch partner with Apple Vision Pro. So they've tried to make it easy to port stuff over. It's still something we don't have on the roadmap at this moment. And also commercially, there's not enough of a market because of the expense of the headset. Yeah. So it's not like we would earn a profit from investing in doing a port. I have no doubt. I mean, I like the Apple device. I don't like the price, but it's not really supposed to be accessible at this point. It's just a big indicator that they're thinking about this seriously and will continue to think about it. So I think that's a good sign for people who are creating immersive work.
Yeah, it's funny. Whenever I talk to an immersive person, I'm only 3 so far, but I'm thinking like, with the funds that Apple has, they should just do free ports for everything. Everything that works on Meta they should just like, oh, well, it's we'll port it for you because we need more content.
Yeah, they probably don't need more content. Who knows? These are complicated decisions because of how they think the ecosystem is gonna change. But yeah, I have colleagues who have ported over projects that I've seen at festivals and that are also, independent or modestly budgeted. So it's definitely not impossible. I have colleagues that are making custom stuff for that headset just because they're so excited by the technology and some of the differences in the headset. So I think it's viable. It's just for something like Ajax, something like Gargoyle Doyle, it's really supposed to be extraordinarily accessible and to have a storytelling and a story that a wide audience is going to like and it's going to just work. So for, it's kind of like iPhone, Android or something. There's just this, the Meta headsets are the only game in town when it comes to the numbers. Like I said, in that way, it's not like iPhone because lots of people have iPhones, but the Meta has taken a stand of like, let's get a lower cost. Like this is a Quest 3, but then, last year they released the Quest 3S, which is even less expensive. And Doyle plays great on that. So with the mixed reality, it looks great. And I can't remember exactly the price, but is it $299 or $199? These are devices that are cheaper than your phone, and they're in the range where people could buy it for a Christmas gift or a birthday gift or just an impulse buy, and that's good. So I just want my content to be on where the most people are going to be like booting up the store, searching for comedy, seeing what looks fun, and be something that you don't have to be VR proficient and they're not expensive on the store. Ajax is $399. So hopefully we get a couple clicks.
That covered a question I had.
Yeah. Hopefully you click on it just because it's like Henry Winkler. Oh, I like, or Chris Parnell or Genie. This looks cool, and you just buy it and watch it, and you're like, well, that's great. I know a lot more than I thought. Than I even wanted, than I knew that I don't even know what I'm saying. I know more now than I thought.
I mean, look, we're sitting at a table where we hold a game night a couple times a year.
Yeah.
If I had one of these, I can promise you, if I paid $3.99 for Ajax, no one's leaving game night till they've watched it. You know what I mean? Like. Yeah,
I want to be the piece that's easy to launch for somebody when you have a headset and your cousin's over who has never seen one. And you're like, what can I put them in the headset for, to watch or to play or to experience? What are among the couple of experiences that I know they're going to like it, they're going to get it, they're going to be like, I see, this is different from what I've seen before. That was great, and they could be excited about seeing more stuff.
And Doyle at 40, have you? Do you know what the ceiling is on length, or you're just going to keep finding
in terms of user experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I admit,
and like
I had no issues at all with the 15-minute runtime, and I assume I would have no issues at all with 40. My wife kind of reported something a little different when she saw the music video. She kind of took the headset off and she was like, yeah, I didn't want that on my head too much longer.
Yeah.
Which I'm just nerdier. But,
People react differently to the optics of the device, whether it fits comfortably. For me, it's not, it's mostly what bothers me about wearing a VR headset is usually how it's fitting on my forehead. Like I'm just more sensitive to that, not something about how my eyes are resolving, in the looking through the lenses. Different people feel the opposite. So like this is, you can buy more comfortable. This is like a better strap than you can buy. Like the cheapest version has a less comfortable strap. This is like the upsell version. It makes a big difference for me. And I'm already an expert in the devices, so I know, I'm definitely going to pay the extra $100 or whatever it is because it will make it much more comfortable. To a novice coming in, there could be any number of things that they're hitting friction about, and they don't know it's the strap or it's the interocular setting, and they don't know what it is. They just think, I don't really like VR. It also is, when you're looking at stereoscopic video, there's issues of stereoscopy that is related to how it was captured. It's nothing to do with the device you're watching it on. The weight of certain headsets is more than others. There's so many considerations that the bummer is that when people don't like it, it could be for any number of reasons, but you're unlikely to get a second chance, at least for a long time. They're going to be like, I tried it, wasn't for me. 40 minutes is way too long because of something I watched that was a few minutes, last year. That is the bummer. We can't control that. The best thing that can happen for VR creators or immersive media creators is for the hardware to improve, for people to have good experiences, to watch something that they love first, so that then if the second thing is shit, they'll want to see a third one. If the first thing they watch is shit, are they ever going to watch a second one? You just want it to be good stuff so that they start to believe in it, as a medium and not just as like a one-off or a gimmick or a novelty.
Yeah, I can't help it. I can't help but think the comparison is almost like a restaurant. Like if you go to a restaurant and you order the wrong thing and you hate it, you don't go back to that restaurant.
Ever, yeah.
But there might have been 5 or 7 dishes that you would have loved. But you have to. That's so interesting. But this is, I don't know. I guess it comes down to curation too.
Yeah. And, Apple is super, super focused on curating what's on the device, and Meta was, and they've loosened that dramatically recently. I mean, they loosened it slowly over time, but then they made a dramatic change to what can go in their store, which is good and bad. But, there's a balance like everything. It's just you can't control, people that... it's almost like instead of one restaurant, it's like it's a whole chain. A chain with many opportunities to eat there all over the world, and it's excellent, but some chains are worse than others. Some dishes are worse than others, and there's going to be a bunch of, potential happy customers that are going to get put off by their first experience with that. And so I'm, here I am like a promoter of the whole medium, not only my work, but wanting people to like everything like that's there so that I can be one of the things that they watch and experience, or my work can be one of the things that they love and part of the reason they get a headset.
Yeah, and the more headsets, the more people have a positive experience, the more people tell their friends, and then more headsets sell. I see them at Costco.
Yeah.
I got to admit, I think they're still there, but yeah, when I look at them, I'm always, I can't help but ponder it, because I do have a few friends who were years ago, even actually. One of the first people on this podcast was raving about. Before Meta bought Oculus.
Oh yeah,
that he liked to watch movies on. He was a film director, fairly successful film director. He just liked a simulated theater. He could look at the speakers on the walls and stuff, but there was a movie screen. He transported himself just to watch movies that way. And I thought, why do I need that? But he wasn't as good a salesman.
Yeah, well, that's one of the stances that Apple took in their marketing. They weren't saying this is a great gaming device. It might be. Meta says it's a great gaming device. They were saying this is a premium TV screen. This is a better way to watch Apple TV than your normal TV. And that, that's a really interesting angle and maybe a successful one over time. It's hard to tell. I don't think a bunch of people bought the headset to replace their TV, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're watching the headsets or we're buying the headsets to replace our laptops or televisions in whatever form factor they are in the pretty near term, and that the way that they're priced and the way that they fit into our life is much more like that, where and there's some devices out there that I think are sort of maybe too early, but where it's a keyboard and wired glasses. You put it on and all your multi-monitor setup is there. And now it's your laptop, and there's it's just a VR laptop. So that's a really interesting way to come at it for make it being a useful tool.
Yeah, in fact, my impression of the Vision Pro was that Apple was envisioning it as replacing their monitors and so that and it would be AR, so you'd see through it, and you could have these huge monitors and work on them. Yeah, although then a lot of people would say, well, but do I really want to have this on my head all day? Like I'm looking at my computer monitor all day.
Right.
And who knows? Who knows? Well, dang, this is all so very cool.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Ajax and Gargoyle Doyle and VR.
Yeah. And so are you just, you've mentioned clients and things, so are you balancing out the next project, or you have ideas?
Yeah, so Gargoyle Doyle is now, we still do an update every, couple months or so to fix a couple little bugs that pop up or whatever, but that's pretty much
How cool that you can do
done.
That.
Yeah. It's
when
just
you release something on Netflix, you can't go in and fix and edit.
It's just an app, floating in the Metastore. But so that is, even a lot of last year, I was still doing quite a bit of work and on Gargoyle Doyle. So at this stage, I do VR consulting for other companies, and I do a lot of VR training stuff with a portion of the time while I'm developing originals. One piece of good news is it looks like I've got development funding for the next original piece, which has a million differences from everything that we've talked about. It's not, I wouldn't say it's even in the same world, because it's very much, first of all, it's a game. Second of all, you are much more first-person embodied, interactive, and you are, a lot of what I talked about that I'm trying to do in Gargoyle Doyle and in previous pieces and in Ajax All Powerful is very different with this piece. It's much longer. It is a game. It involves a lot of live action material. There's a lot of complexity, but I have been working on this project for more than 10 years, even before it was VR. But it's a really interesting project, and I spent a lot of last year pitching and talking to people about it and talking to lots of companies about it and looking for prototyping and development funds. And we're negotiating the contract, but the interest is there, and I think we're going to be able to make a deal so that I can start prototyping and with the team soon, this year, which will start answering all those questions that I can't really answer right now because of just what it takes to answer those questions is too many different disciplines combined.
I'm about to say something that's almost too cheesy, but it's almost like I'm sitting across from Moliere, like you know what I mean, like one of those pioneers of cinema, like somebody who was just absolutely blazing a trail, and 100 years later we still know that person's name. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, that would be the dream. That would be the dream, though I'll be dead 100 years from now. But I'm definitely trying to do something that is meaningful, not only to the project itself and to the viewers of the project, but to the medium. That does really inspire me. That it's everything for me or my colleagues is a brick in this wall, and I want to influence how this wall goes up, and how it looks and how useful these pieces are to other people.
Yeah, and hopefully, it sounds like you're well established enough that when they're working on Quest 4 or whatever, can you get a prototype so you can start I don't know. Am I fantasizing too much?
Yeah, I hope so.
Whatever new, because every time they add new features, it gives you a new color palette.
Yeah, and people who are doing this work over these years we know and are in conversations with people at the companies. Like I know people at Meta, I know people at Apple. There is a creator, community. I wouldn't say I'm an insider. I'm pretty indie here, but these are relationships and conversations that go over years. And there is information flow about what the important features are, or even just what the emphasis is. A few years ago, it was pass-through video. I was making Gargoyle Doyle, imagining AR scenes prior to that being available on any headsets, even announced on any headsets. We were, far into it before the tool set became available. We're far into making prototypes and pitching. And so I'm doing that again. I'm making some guesses. I'm using information that is public and also some casual, but I don't know any big secrets, but I'm making predictions about our experience and interactions with this medium and thinking about what's going to work well, next year and the year after.
I should probably just let it stop, but I have no discipline. You just made me start thinking about there should be a freaking immersive podcast where you interview the maker and then you actually see the piece on your headset and then you get a follow-up interview with the maker. You know what I mean? Like they're
well, if any listeners are interested in the conversation about the immersive media, there's some really great work that's been done. One is a podcast called Voices of VR. This guy Kent Bai, who has been in it since I'm sure before 2016, interviewing tons of people at the festivals. Not VR game world people, but people who are oriented towards storytelling, experiential stories, which is a niche. It's a niche within VR, which is already a niche. But I would recommend that. You could go back years in the archive and listen to all sorts of people that I've been interviewed once about. I guess it was Gargoyle Doyle but I've seen him at many events and know him over time. And yeah, that's a great resource. And if you were anyone who's interested in storytelling in VR, sometimes it's hard to discover those projects in something like the Metastore, which is oriented toward games. You can buy Ajax, you can buy Gargoyle Doyle, you can search for that in the store and find them. But it's hard to find other pieces that just because of they don't have a storytelling category in the game store. It really is a game store that has some other random stuff in there too, like my work. So it can be hard to find, but the source that I would say is look at what's being programmed at South by Southwest in their category for immersive media. Look at what's being programmed at the Venice Film Festival in Italy, which is probably the premier place. And Sundance used to do it, and Tribeca used to do it. Now they've changed their emphasis a little bit. Sundance doesn't do immersive anymore, and Tribeca has changed how they curate that. It's not a regular portion of the festival. It's like a special pillar. But South by still does it. Venice still does it. Annecy, Americans say Annecy in France. All of those are places. If you just looked what was there in the last few years and then Google, a lot of those are on the Metastore. It's just hard to find them. But if you use the film festivals that have been supporting narrative immersive work over the last few years as your point of contact, and then go and find if it's available publicly, that's a great way to do it.
Absolutely. Excellent. And if people want to follow you, I assume there's a website or social media?
Yeah. So EthanShaftel.com is an easy place to find me. I'm either eShaftel or Ethan Action or Easy Action. My company is Easy Action, one word, on LinkedIn and Instagram and all that. And Doyle won the Webby.
Just won a Webby
2 days ago for best. I'm going to say it wrong. Best narrative experience in the immersive category, the People's Voice Award. So the voting one.
Excellent.
We're happy about that.
Well, it was an honor to talk to you. I have to say, super enjoyed the conversation. I guess I enjoyed the conversation equally to the piece, but
Awesome.
They were both fantastic.
Well, I enjoyed being here. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'll do my closeout, although, geez, it's so funny because now I'm about to talk about the film festivals. But anyway, thank you, anyone listening to this. This was the Discover Indie Film Podcast. It is devoted to filmmakers on the festival circuit, and in this case, a truly inventive frontier kind of storytelling, because we were talking about immersive video the whole time. So if you want to learn more about this podcast, go to discoverindiefilm.com. Social media is always at DIFwins. We mentioned how Ajax All Powerful was at the Sherman Oaks Film Festival. We hold that one every December. This is the 10th anniversary year, 2025. We're having our 10th one. And we will keep doing the VR thing at the galas, I'm pretty sure. It's just funny because now I'm like, God, I gotta like find a way to have more.
Yeah.
Like more headsets, because it really was, we didn't want to tell everyone, hey, go upstairs, there's VR, because we knew there was like a limited number. But everyone who saw it was amazed. And honestly, I almost feel like I was cheated that I didn't get to see anything. But that's what a podcast is for, I guess. So anyway, that's discoverindiefilm.com is the website. If you go to discoverindiefilm.org, that is for the nonprofit that runs the film festivals. So go there. Why not? But if you want to learn more about Sherman Oaks Film Festival, it's ShermanOaksFF.com, and it's at Sherman Oaks FF on social media. It's Sister Festival every June, and June is coming up on me too fast, but that is Film Invasion Los Angeles, and there will be an opening night gala with a VR pavilion at that. So, or I should call it immersive pavilion, because I know, whatever. So, the language of this, when you're on the frontiers,
it keeps shifting.
There's because when you say no, there could be AR, there could be 360, 180, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, Film Invasion Los Angeles is in June. You can learn more at filminvasionla.com and at filminvasionla on social media. And I mentioned that I called those two festivals sister festivals. In 2026, they're getting a cousin in Lima, Peru. We're going to have Film Invasion Lima. I'm kind of excited about that. So anyway, Ethan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.